Warning: this video contains spoilers for Apollo Justice Ace Attorneys, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice. Now I know this opinion isn't very popular, but Apollo Justice is my favorite character in the entirety of Ace Attorney. Better than Phoenix, better than Godot, better than Edgeworth, and better than Maya. A lot of people seem to not really like Apollo Justice and see him as a Phoenix clone. I heavily disagree with this notion and feel that the character of Apollo Justice has unfortunately been mistaken. Let's dive into the character of Apollo Justice, starting with his first entry, Apollo Justice Ace Attorney. Apollo Justice, surprisingly, introduces Apollo Justice. In the first case, Turnabout Trump, which is widely considered one of the best first cases in Ace Attorney, it's Apollo's first trial in which he has to defend Phoenix Wright. Yep, Phoenix is a defendant. Now, before I talk about Apollo, I want to quickly go over the character of Phoenix Wright and his development in the Phoenix Wright trilogy. Phoenix's arc in the trilogy was all about learning what it meant to defend someone. He started in the first game with the idea that defending was about sticking up for people when nobody would. In JFA, however, he learns that the truth is more important than anything else. In TNT, he still values the truth, but instead becomes more independent and shows that he can find the truth without any help. However, Phoenix has always valued faith over everything else. This brings me to Apollo Justice. You see, Apollo is different from that mentality. Many people would bring up Turnabout Tomorrow as a good example for this. But that is the only time you see Apollo relying less on fate than his mentor. In Turnabout Trump, Apollo can't trust anyone. Phoenix is very suspicious, Trucy is clearly hiding things, and the witness acts strange. The only person he can trust is himself, and his mentor, Christoph Gavin. At this point, you probably know where I'm going with this. Christoph Gavin ended up being the killer in Turnabout Trump. Suddenly, the man he trusted the most was actually the one hiding the most. This is where I think Apollo became less about faith and took on a more logical approach, after seeing the man he trusted the most betray him. A similar situation to this would be in Turnabout Memories when Dahlia betrayed Phoenix. The difference between those two events being that Apollo reacted completely different to it than Phoenix did. Phoenix, like always, stayed faithful to Dahlia no matter what, whereas Apollo was a bit more rational and considered the possibility that his mentor might be evil. I know I'm doing a lot of comparison, but I'm just trying to prove the people that say Apollo is a Phoenix clone wrong. His relationship with Phoenix Wright is also very important. He starts off by looking up to him and maybe even being a bit of a fanboy, but quickly grows out of it after interacting with him and being weirded out with him. The great thing about this is that it represents the player really well. Most likely, the player would have played the trilogy, so they would put Phoenix in a high position just like Apollo did. They would be just as shocked and curious as Apollo when they find out Phoenix lost his badge, and they would just be just as weirded out as Apollo when they realize just how much Phoenix has changed. Enough talk about relationships. What do we have in store for us in Turnabout Corner? More relationships. First of all, Turnabout Corner is the first time we really get the feeling that Phoenix has changed. Now, a lot of people would probably be objecting to that and claiming that the first time we really felt Phoenix changed was in Turnabout Trump. You would be half correct in that. You see, the whole using phony evidence and hiding things isn't new to Phoenix. He's done it before. A key example of this would be Best Before Turnabout, in which to get the killer, Furio Tigre, to slip up, he presents a phony piece of evidence and then pretends like it was used to murder him. This gets the killer to slip up, as the only way he would know it's phony is if he was the killer. The same thing happens in Turnabout Trump. So no, Phoenix hasn't changed, but we do feel like he changed because we're looking at him in a third-person view. And now, all those things that we did before that were perfectly ethical seem a lot less ethical. So technically, Turnabout Corner is the first time we really see Phoenix act strange. How about Trucy? Honestly, there's not much to say about Trucy and Apollo, except they're basically a less interesting version of Phoenix and Maya. Not the characters themselves, but instead their relationships. This is still one of the few things I believe Phoenix does better than Apollo. Other than that, however, there isn't really much to say about Corner when it comes to Apollo's character, other than getting the more sarcastic side of him out, who really gets hated a lot, like in the game, not in real life. So, without further ado, let's move on to Turnabout Serenade. Most people seem to not really like Turnabout Serenade. In my opinion, it's actually really good, not only because of it being generally just an interesting and fun case, but also because of how it relates to the overall story of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, and how it adds layers to the character of Apollo Justice. Right from the start, Apollo Justice becomes way more interesting when we're given information on what he thinks of Clavier. Unlike what Case 2 might have you believe, Apollo is actually envious of Clavier and all his fame. This really adds much more to Apollo than having the usual, oh wow, what a douche type of perspective to prosecutors that Phoenix has. This is one of the reasons I like Clavier. There's a lot of variety with him and what the main characters think of him. Phoenix thinks of him as an arrogant youth, Apollo's envious, and Athena's a fan. Bottom line is that this makes Apollo unique, and in my opinion, his perspective on Clavier is the most interesting of all. Anyway, the main reason I like Turnabout 7 is actually the main reason people don't like the case. Its logical failings. The thing is that I feel its logical failings were on purpose to drive home the fact that the legal system in the Ace Attorney series is corrupt. It always has been. The difference here is the characters are getting self-conscious. What does this mean for Apollo, you ask? A lot, actually. I believe that just like how Phoenix's goal in the original trilogy was to understand what it means to defend someone, Apollo's goal throughout this new trilogy was to understand the law and fight for a change. This is the first time we really see this goal in action, and then in the end of Apollo Justice, Apollo has a speech about how he wants to understand the law and change it to provide hope. This kickstarts his journey. Anyway, Dual Destinies, here comes justice. A lot of people seem to believe that Apollo was completely ignored in Dual Destinies. I completely disagree. I feel out of all the three main characters, Apollo was the one that got the most development in Dual Destinies. Now, since the game is more split than the other games, let's look solely at the fourth and fifth case. The fourth case is when Apollo's best friend dies, and he has to defend the man accused for the crime. It's the first time we've seen Apollo deal with grief, unless you count Kristoff. I really like how they handled Apollo in the fourth case. He was really out of character, but rightly so. It really shows how close they were. Things only get crazier when he accuses Athena of the crime in case 5. I love this moment. It goes back to the more doubtful, logical nature of Apollo that we saw in Turnabout Trump. This is also when Apollo learns about doubt, just like Phoenix learned about doubt in JFA. However, since Apollo's character was already pretty doubtful, he learned it in a very different way. Instead of learning about how you should always be doubtful about your faith, he learns that faith without doubt is meaningless and that to further evaluate and prove our faith we should be doubtful and unbiased, which is a great message about doubt after JFA, which handled the idea pretty well. Now let's look at the game that completed the character of Apollo Justice, Spirit of Justice. For Spirit of Justice, we were looking at Case 2 and 5 as those are the only cases Apollo is present in. The main service Case 2 does for Apollo is that it strengthens his relationship with Trucy. Remember what I said earlier, I basically thought that the relationship of Apollo and Trucy was a reverse version of the relationship between Phoenix and Maya. And while I still don't think their relationship is as good as Phoenix and Maya's, I still think it was improved. A lot. Basically, Trucy hides her feelings inside. She always puts a smile on, even though she feels very pressured to fulfill the Gramarye name, and finds it hard to trust herself or anyone around her when she feels she made a mistake. Paula then reassures her that she didn't do anything wrong, that he believes her. Trucy then starts believing in herself and Apollo. This is pretty touching and makes their relationship a lot more interesting and stronger. Now, time for a revolution. Turnabout Revolution is the case that brings an end to Apollo's story. Some of you have probably noticed that I haven't talked about Apollo's backstory, and I will continue to not do. Why? Well, to be honest, I don't think his backstory adds much to the character, which is why I decided not to look at it, and it's also why I found the lack of backstory in the first Apollo Justice game perfectly acceptable. Now, Turnabout Revolution, I mainly want to talk about the last decision that Apollo makes. Once this case is finally complete, Nayuta asks Apollo to stay in Khura'in and fight for the revolution, then go back home. Apollo has a hard time deciding, but ultimately decides to stay. Earlier I said that Apollo's goal was to understand the law and fight for a change, and to provide hope. I believe that Apollo has fulfilled his goal, completed as a character when he made that decision in Turnabout Revolution. Apollo's character is great, misunderstood, and complete. I don't feel he has any more room for development, although I do want him to return. Not in the US, but instead just one case per game of him being in Khura'in, while future games should mostly focus on Athena, who sadly hasn't developed at all since her introduction in Dual Destinies. And that's all I have to say for this topic. Hope this entertained or helped.